Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Today we'll be taking a closer look on how to set up TaxTally both as a standalone program and integrated to Prophecy Dispatch. Presenting today will be Steve Conover, our Senior Implementation Consultant. Steve?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kevin, and thank you for joining us today. Let's take a quick preview at what we're going to be covering. We're going to be looking at vehicle IFTA options, the dispatch integration process between the dispatch program and TaxTally program, reconciling vehicle mileage, being able to adjust miles and fuel, manually entering trips for the standalone application, how to enter new transactions for state miles as well as fuel purchased. We will also be looking at IFTA reporting, the ton per mile tax reports for New York, Kentucky, New Mexico, or Oregon, and also how to download updated rates at the beginning of each new quarter. Let's begin. So where we're going to begin the demo, I'm actually going to get into my live program. I'm going to start off in the Prophecy Dispatch application. For the users that have the standalone TaxTally, you might also be familiar with the Prophecy One shell application. Essentially what we're interested in here is under the Maintain menu option, the tractor records. Within the tractor record is an actual fuel tax setting button. Within the fuel tax setting button, this has the controls for whether or not the vehicle profile is actually recognized as an IFTA reportable vehicle, as well as whether you would like to use this as active for TaxTally as well, again, TaxTally being the IFTA reportable program. Other features inside of this fuel tax setting, other than the IFTA reportable and active for TaxTally, would be the option to use odometer entry or the link entry. The difference between odometer entry and link entry is link entry will allow you to take the program miles when transferring, when you complete a trip in dispatch. It allows you to transfer the state totals and mileage and miles from a trip lookup using our default mileage program and have that be the foundation for creating the trip transaction in TaxTally. If you do not have the dispatch integration and you use the link entry, which is the non-odometer entry process, there is a mileage lookup. It allows you to plug in city, state, and we will look up miles and break them down by state based on your itinerary points. With the odometer entry method, it actually requires you to put in a segment by segment where you record the odometer at your border crossings. I'm actually going to show you an example of both these methods in the TaxTally program. So with this tractor, we're going to go with the non-odometer entry method. I also have a secondary tractor set up that will use the odometer entry method, so I can show you an example of both. Now the actual transferring integration occurs under the accounting menu in dispatch. And as just to point out once again, as a standalone user, if you're using the TaxTally without the dispatch integration, then you would not use this portion of it. You would go directly into TaxTally and enter your transactions by hand. But under the accounting for dispatch, you have two posting fields that are critical in order to begin the fuel tax reporting process. One would be the posting of driver advances, and the second would be the posting of fuel taxes. The driver advances are the actual fuel purchases that were either entered directly into dispatch or imported through some sort of fuel card interface with one of the many fuel card vendors that we interface with. We're going to start off by first posting the fuel taxes. Now the fuel taxes are trip numbers that have been marked completed within the dispatch system. In order to post, it is simply just select the transactions you want and click the post button. That will then migrate the trip data, which is represented by the states broken down with mileages in each state, using our mileage program as the basis for that information. There are some date settings. I do recommend that when posting trips from dispatch to TaxTally, that you give yourself a little bit of leeway, meaning you do not want to post too close to your actual operational date range. I usually recommend a minimum of a 2-week delay, if not longer. And the reason why is because if you post a trip to TaxTally, it will actually lock the trip and its itinerary, so you will not be able to edit that trip. And this could interfere with you having to make changes or corrections to billing or payroll. So again, delay your postings. So using a date filter can allow you to only post transactions within a set date range. Then you can select all the transactions in that date range and then post them over into TaxTally. So once again, a very simple select all and post will migrate the rest of my trip transactions out of my dispatch program and into my fuel tax program, TaxTally. Any fuel advances that are in the system that are linked to those trip numbers will automatically move to TaxTally at that time. So if all fuel entered are trip-related fuel purchases, then they migrate themselves automatically. For the non-trip related fuel purchases, you actually have to perform a second migration step under the accounting menu, post-driver advances. This is where your fuel purchases will be visible, the non-trip related fuel purchases, and more specifically the ones under type, I'm looking for the fuel advances. In this particular example, I'm looking for the ones from 2014. When posting, you want to pay particular attention, if using the payroll, that you do not post a tax transaction that has not already cleared payroll. Once again, we want to make sure that it clears payroll before sending the fuel tax, because most of your fuel taxes do not have to be reported, but on a delay, usually one a month or longer in the arrears. You do have time to wait for these items to clear your payroll. I'm going to just select my items and once again post, and I very simply have then just migrated those transactions out of my dispatch program, and when I go into TaxTally, they will be there awaiting for me for my IFTA reporting. So that actually concludes the actual portion in dispatch in terms of migrating the data. A recap of what we just did was maintain tractors. Tractor information is shared with TaxTally. Under fuel tax setting, allows you to touch things like indicating whether it's IFTA reportable, indicating whether the vehicle is active for TaxTally, indicating whether you want to use odometer entry method versus the link entry method. There were a couple of other things that I did not mention in terms of defaulting in a fuel type. We allow you to set up a tax fleet ID in an IRP group. I'll show you how to set those up in TaxTally, but I will not return here, but this is where you link those group IDs back to the vehicle profile. Again, I won't be returning back here to point that out, but when we set up the group IDs, this is where you would assign them to any IRP group name or tax fleet name that you might create for separating your vehicles. Then we very quickly, under the accounting module, we did the post-driver advances for sending the fuel transactions and the post-fuel taxes for sending the mileage and state data over to TaxTally. Now we're actually going to launch TaxTally. So under Applications, Run TaxTally, we'll open up our TaxTally program. Okay. Once we are in TaxTally, I would like to first start by visiting your preferences. In your preferences, your company data information is where the system is going to pull when you go to run your IFTA report. It uses the state from your preferences as the reporting state. It also uses the company information from the company data side as well. We also will show you the rates version that I'm currently running. So 4-2012, which means I'm running fourth quarter rates of 2012, so I'm a little bit behind on updating my rates. The 02 is the release version. It was the second release of our rates. So clearly my rates are not up to date, so that's good because I will be updating them with you today. We also allow you to link your any tax IDs that you might have specific for Kentucky, New York, New Mexico, or Oregon. We also have a tax preparation data. This is if you are preparing the data for somebody else. This would be your preparer information, EIN, name, address, city, state, zip. Under the Maintain menu option is where we are able to then set up some additional items. We can update things like fleet IDs. An example of a fleet ID would be somebody who has trucks both of their own as well as their owner-operators. You can create a fleet ID for your company trucks, and then you could create a fleet ID for your owner-operators. What this will allow you to do is before running your IFTA report, it would allow you to take and extract the report by fleet. So I could say I just want to run it for my company fleet, and it will only run it for the vehicles that are assigned to the company fleet code and leave out the other ones. Or I could flip that and say I want to run it for my owner ops if I wanted to see what their costs were. Okay. I can assign a unit right from here, assign unit, click the drop down, unit number, or I can remove the unit from that group. I go back to company, assign, it's now a company fleet unit number. Okay, so this allows me to keep a little bit of maintenance and separation within my vehicles if I want to make classifications. Maybe I'm managing multiple sites of my own. I have 2 different facilities, and I want to run my IFTA based on the 2 different facilities. I can assign those vehicles to the different facility names. Another thing that you can do in the system is under Maintain is you can set up different vendors. It allows you to create vendor ID, name, address, and information. When you set up a vendor, you want to make sure that you check Use for all states. Otherwise, the vendor will only appear in the state in which you show their address to reside in. The benefit to applying a vendor on in the system, and I'm just going to create one. I'm just going to say mobile here. The advantage to this is that when you put your fuel into the TaxTally program, if you assign a vendor, you can actually see fuel by vendor in some of the side reports that TaxTally offers. Okay. So again, I'm going to say use for all states. Otherwise, this vendor would only be available to me if I'm buying fuel in Connecticut. So I want mobile to be a national chain available in any state, even though I'm using a default city-state here just for setup purposes. Now, to actually browse transactions, more specifically the ones that I posted over, but any existing transactions as well, I like to use the Trip Manager. The Trip Manager is the traffic light button in the toolbar. When I click on that, it brings up all of my different unit IDs. I'm going to be focusing on Unit 001 tractor and Unit 002 tractor. When you are using the Trip Manager as a way to browse, it's like any other tree view type of functionality. When I click on the drop-down, it's going to show me the trip transactions. Notice I have 3 trip numbers and a fuel purchase. Okay. If I were to click on the fuel on that transaction number, it actually shows me that I have 150 gallons in Missouri. I could go to either one of these trip numbers and click on the drop-down, and it's showing me my state breakdowns with my mileage totals. Also attached to this trip number is also a fuel purchase. You can see 84 gallons in Connecticut. Now, it is important to point out that this trip browser is filtering on a date filter. So you can see that it's only going to show me transactions that are from January 1st to March 31st. This is very, very important because a lot of times people will not see transactions they're looking for, because if I start looking at these in April and it's going to be on second quarter, well, in second quarter, even though this is filtering second quarter, what I'm trying to report on is first quarter. So when I click on this, it might be alarming if I don't see any transactions. Remember to check your trip date range so that you are viewing the quarter that you want to report on. If I were to double click on any one of these transaction IDs, it will zoom me into what we call a transaction sheet. Okay, so this represents the actual tax transaction. This is what we report on. This is the basis information, the states and the miles by state as represented by that trip number as transferred by dispatch. Any state that has anything in the gallons column represents fuel purchased in that state. And again, I'm going to show you how to manually enter one of these, but this here is how one comes over through the transfer. One of the most important things about your fuel taxes is you want to make sure that you are that you reconcile your actual, the program miles versus an actual mileage. Now, actual miles are very easy to calculate. You just need an odometer reading at the first of the month and an odometer reading at the last of the month. If you subtract the two numbers, the growth in odometer is the number of miles you traveled in that time frame. I like to reconcile monthly. I like to recommend that to my users. That way you don't fall too far behind. That way by the end of the last month of the quarter, you only have 1 month that needs reconciling. One of my more favorite reports that I like to use for reconciling is under the reports menu. It's a unit report, and it is called distance and fuel purchased by tractor. I like to run this on a summary because all I'm really looking for is my vehicle's total miles and my vehicle's total fuel, because I want to get an idea of how many miles I might be plus or minus. I might be over or under in terms of mileage. I also want to make sure that when I run this summary report that I run it on the proper time frame. So I'm just going to do March for myself right here in this example. I could also, if you notice, if I select fleets, I can say company and it will only show me my company trucks and it will ignore all of the other trucks. So this is what I mean as a filtering option by setting up fleets. I'm going to now run this report, and the report is going to list the units. Now I only have 3 units with miles in this time frame, but it gives me the total miles and the total fuel purchased. So here's my fuel and here's my miles. Here's my fuel cost for the month. Now obviously my numbers are used just for an example, okay? Obviously your miles would probably be much higher. But this allows me to now compare this to actual data. I figure out how many miles my truck actually drove, I compare it to this number, and that represents the number of miles that I need to either add to the TaxTally program or subtract from the TaxTally program. If the program mile is higher than my odometer, then I need to subtract miles from the program. If my program mileage is lower than my odometer, then I have to add miles to the program. Typically, that's the case. Most of the time, the program is going to be short miles. And the reason why is because in the real world, you drive that truck more than the trips that your dispatch program actually logs. It's usually the 10 miles from the yard to the house or from the delivery back to the yard that you don't tend to capture through transaction entry or through transferring. Okay. So those are the miles that you want to look out for and that you want to add into the program. I'll show you a very simple way on how to add those in just a moment. So as I mentioned, this is one of my more favorite reports for using for reconciling. Now, that is my segue into, well, how do we get those miles into the program? And they are essentially one and the same on how a standalone user would manually add a transaction. So new transactions are added through the gold money bag. The gold money bag is right here. It's the first toolbar button in your toolbar. It's labeled fuel tax. I click on that. I do want to warn you that when it opens up, if you have existing transactions, it defaults to the last one that you viewed. The reason why I make mention of that is because if you do not remember to click add, then you will be changing an existing transaction. So if I want to create a new transaction for the system, I want to make sure that I click Add. This gives me a brand new blank transaction where I now want to select the unit number that I would like to enter the miles in states and fuel. Now I'm going to leave it on unit number 001 tractor. Then I can pick the date. Now if I'm putting miles in by day, then obviously I link it to the day that I want the miles to fall on. But because TaxTally is just a means to an end, meaning the information is just a means to get me to a tax report, it is possible for me to use one transaction to put in an entire week's worth of miles for a vehicle, or an entire month's worth of miles for a vehicle. I do not have to put in a transaction entry for each day. I just need to make sure that all the miles get in for the appropriate states. The number of transactions in which you do that in is entirely up to you as the end user. The difference being is the amount of detail that you then get back later. Do you want to have one transaction representing the whole month, or do you want 30 transactions? In the end, the sum of the 30 transactions is going to have the same number of miles as if you put it into one transaction, which will give you the same result on an IFTA report. So as an end user, you get to make that decision. So the trip date, if I were doing this, I would put it in for the month, and I would just want to make sure that that date falls within the month of March. So as long as the trip transaction has a date within March, then the miles and the fuel that I enter on the transaction are going to report in that month. The trip name will get assigned automatically when you save the transaction. But in a case where you are making a reconciling entry where you need to add miles to the application, I will actually name the trip myself manually. That is a reconcile entry for 3 of 2014, for March 2014. I would also include the unit number so that if I'm making other reconciling entries for other units, the unit number will make it unique for this month. So I can name them all reconcile 3/2014, but it's the suffix at the end of the unit ID that allows me to save it as a unique transaction. Otherwise, if you're not making a reconciling entry, when you hit save, the application will assign a trip number by default. Now the process is actually very simple. These line items are called legs. The legs are meant to represent the state in which you traveled through. So by clicking the drop down, I can put in a state code, and then I can go over and enter in the number of miles spent in that state. So this is a manual entry transaction. So I could say I did 200 miles in Missouri. I can click add leg. I can enter in Illinois. I can say I did 150 miles in that state. And then if I wanted to, I could add another leg, and I could say Iowa, and I'm going to tell it that I did 300 miles there. And then what I'm going to do is if I purchased any fuel, I can either recycle the same line, or if I want to show it on a separate line, I could then plug in the state and the number of gallons that I purchased in that state. Now if I'm doing this manually, the cost per unit, so the per gallon cost, is optional. It is not required. On the IFTA report, IFTA does not care how much you pay for your fuel. But if you provide this information, it will benefit you as a user in some of the reports that we provide, like fuel cost reporting and things of that nature under the reports menu. Again, not required for the IFTA report, but certainly is beneficial to you as a user if that might be data you want to extract out later. Notice how my mobile fueling station is also available, even though it's in Missouri, because I flagged it as used for all states. I'm able to select it as the vendor ID as a generic label to say Flying J or Circle K or wherever I may have purchased my fuel. Once I hit save, this transaction has been recorded. So this is, like I said, a manual process. It can be used for putting your fuel transactions in as a standalone user. It can also be used for putting in missing miles for when you reconcile and your vehicle is missing miles at the end of a month and you want to add 650 miles to your vehicle total, because then it will be an accurate mile reading, so that when you submit your form, the number of miles on your odometer matches the number of miles on your tax form, which would be very important if I were doing this myself. I'd want to make sure those two numbers always matched. That way, in case of an audit, they come in and they're looking at matching numbers, not saying, this is what your odometer tells me and this is what you submitted. That would be a very bad first step. So submit matching odometers on the form as what your vehicle has. Very important. Note to self. All right. Another entry method, I'm going to click Add here, is going to be what's called the TaxLink entry method. This is for standalone users. This allows me to take and put in I thought I had a new zip code off the top of my head here. This allows me to take and put in a state and a city, basically my itinerary or point pairs. So if I want to say from Cleveland, and I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to Schenectady to 02021, then I can hit the lookup button, and what it will do is it will give me state breakdown and mileage total based on our mileage program. If I then click OK, it turned that TaxLink lookup into a transaction entry sheet. Now the only thing that's missing would be my fuel in the state in which I purchased it, optional the amount that I paid for that fuel, and again optional the vendor. I now entered another fuel, another mileage set, another transaction, if you will, of states in miles for this unit number. Okay. My last example, I'm going to click Add. This time I'm going to use unit number 002. And the reason why is because this one is following the odometer entry method. The odometer entry method, in my opinion, is a little bit more labor intensive, but it does give some users the additional granular detail that they might be looking for tracking, for doing their odometer recordings. What's unique about this is that it's entirely based on the fact that you have to have a reading for each time you cross a border. So I'm going to start off in Massachusetts, and it's actually remembering my odometer reading from my last transaction, which is 225. So then what I want to do is I'm going to put in my odometer. So I'm going to say 225 100, because it's then going to tell me that I did 100 miles in Massachusetts. Then I'm going to add a leg, and then I'm going to go to Connecticut, and then I'm going to go 225 230, because I did 130 miles in Connecticut. Then I'm going to add a leg, New York. You notice how the end odometer for the previous line becomes the start odometer for my current line. So I ended in Connecticut at 225 230. I'm now picking up here at 225 230 to wherever I end in New York. So I'm just going to say 225 630. That gives me another 4. That's 630 miles for the day. Again, I then have to pick the state in which I want to enter my fuel, and optionally the cost, and once again optionally the vendor. So this is another entry method, more so for standalone users, although can be used if you're using dispatch as well. If you choose this option though and you have dispatch, this would negate transferring trips. If you go with odometer entry, you do not transfer trips for that unit number. Okay, there's no need to. You wouldn't be using the transaction entries on an odometer entry for fuel tax reporting. So essentially, miles and fuel are the only two things that you really need to have in order for the IFTA fuel tax report to calculate accurately. So you put in your transactions, which covers your miles and your fuel. We discussed the audit report. So under reports, you have unit report. The one I liked was distance in fuel by tractor. on a summary level. I set it for the current month, and I clicked Run. It gave me my total miles, my total fuel, so I could compare this. So very easily, if you use a fuel card, you can very easily compare that to that vehicle's total fuel costs for the month. And by pulling my odometer, I can very easily compare that from my log from the first of the month to the last of the month, compare that to the odometer reading. Enter any missing fuel or miles by using the transaction entry process. Once that is done, generating the IFTA report is actually very simple. To generate the IFTA report, all you have to do is come up here and click on the IFTA button. In the IFTA reporting screen, I then want to tell it what quarter I'm reporting on. Typically, I would be doing this sometime in April, so I would choose previous quarter. I'm running it on the current month because I wanted to grab the miles and transactions that I did for the month of March. I can run this if you're the type of person that likes to keep track of where you are at with what you owe states because you try to balance your return. You can run this as frequently as you like. So I select my time period, and then I click, or I could then add into this a layer of choosing the fleet. I want to run it for just my company trucks. It will exclude any owner-operator vehicles by choosing setting up fleets. I then click Run. My return has already been calculated. Okay? This is an adjustment screen. My amount due is actually a refund of $66.90. Using this program does not guarantee you will get money back. That's the disclaimer in small print. Right? This tells me I'm getting money back. We all know that never happens in real life, right? What this adjustment screen is used for is any previous balances or credits that you might have carried over, penalties, interest, late fees, or anything like that, that you would need to enter in that would adjust. Let's say I didn't pay a $300 balance from a previous quarter. I would put in $300 plus my current credit of $66.90 will then tell them that I owe my state $233.10. That is with my previous balance of $300. If I didn't have a previous balance, then I'm getting $66.90 back. I can put in my file number. I can type in the year, put in the quarter number, year and quarter number, or just the date range, due date, prepared date, file by date, file date. All this information can be filled in by you. Now, if you belong to a state that offers online reporting or requires you to file on their own form, we'll just run the report, and then you can transpose the data off of the report and into whatever necessary form your state requires you to submit. Key is that we're making the calculations for you. They're here, they're available, and you can extract them anytime you want. So my results are actually in two different PDFs. I have a cover sheet and a detail sheet. Now, to save myself some aggravation, I'm going to come down here and click All, Open All. Otherwise, I would have to open each one individually, but by clicking Open All, it actually opens them up. Now, they're going to be two different PDF forms. Now, when I look at this, I'm going to actually toggle over to the first one. This is my actual cover sheet. And you can see it has my date on it. It has my information, my name, my address, my city, state, and zip. And I'm going to scroll down, and it's going to say that I'm getting a refund of $66.90, highly unlikely, right? So that's my actual cover sheet. If the state does not accept the form because they have other intentions of required forms, we will put a watermark on the form to indicate that you could not submit that. No watermark, this has no watermark, means that the state should accept the form. I do include the term should because states do change their requirements. We do stay up to date on those. Although it is possible for a state to change, they don't call and tell us. We do try to update that on a regular basis. If you do run into an instance where you find that a state does not accept your state form, if you just kindly let us know. We will then make the appropriate changes with that state so that we can resubmit the form and get it approved by them again. So here's my actual detailed worksheet. On the detailed worksheet, it actually breaks down by state, the number of miles in each state. My average mile per gallon, I'm pretty good, 6.71. Taxable gallons and the state's tax rate, and of course what that state would be owed or what that state is getting back. Okay, so this is what my home state of Connecticut would use to pay Arizona, Colorado. They would pay those states. They would collect from Missouri and Pennsylvania. So anything, but this is the detailed worksheet that they look towards. Now for states with dual tax rates, notice Indiana, you can see they're listed twice because they are a dual tax rate, or dual tax rate state, I should say. So they have two line items to calculate the total of both the tax rates. Okay, so again, just a worksheet, which is what backs up your cover sheet. But that is the IFTA report. Again, if you can't print and submit it, you can still pull those raw data figures off and plug them into the web-based submission or the online form or the form that the state makes you file on specifically. Okay. I'm just going to show just a couple of other reports that are available to you. Under just the general reports, I would like to go to the unit reports, and I just want to show you the fuel efficiency by tractor. Again, current month for me, and I'm going to run this report. And so it shows my miles and my gallons and then my miles per gallon. I know that a lot of fleet owners can look at a vehicle and they can tell a lot by the miles per gallon. So 7.67 probably doesn't mean I'm getting that type of fuel efficiency. It probably means I forgot to put some fuel in to lower that down. 6.3, 6.7, like, possible. 5.8, more likely. So those kind of ring true as kind of accurate MPGs. You want to, like I said, it's something that when you get this information over here, you can look at that, you can help analyze, you can see a vehicle, you can run it month by month and start comparing fuel efficiencies and try to identify trends in your miles per gallon. Oftentimes we recognize it based on who's driving the vehicle as well. Also under unit reports, see. There's one particular one I was hoping to find. If I can find it very quickly, I'd like to show it to you. It was the vendor purchases. So if I were to run this report, it would actually show me fuel purchases broken down by vendor. And it will actually subtotal these by the actual vendor name. So then I can look at if my fuel is coming over and I've assigned it with a vendor, I can then extract this, and then I can see exactly how much fuel I'm spending with Flying J, Circle K, Mobile, or whatever different fuel vendors you would frequent, and it's going to give me those fuel costs. Very helpful for a lot of people as well. Okay, so that is TaxTally. Excuse me. One last thing I'd like to show you with reports. We also cover the reports for Kentucky, New Mexico, Oregon, and New York. So those 4 states have a separate ton per mile tax that is typically paid monthly. I know that oftentimes Oregon allows you to prepay. If you know that I think it's Oregon, if you're going to go through their state, you can actually prepay this tax rather than calculate and pay it afterwards. But it's called the ton per mile. It's under the toolbar icon with the red T on it. When I open this up, I have to pick the state that I'm going to be running the report for. Now I'm going to choose New York, just because I know that I have miles in New York because we just entered some together. I'm going to choose the current month, and I'm going to click Run. And by the time it's done calculating, or it shows me the sheet, it's already calculated what I owe, $124.92. So this is it's based on the vehicle weight class. Okay, and so basically it breaks it down, it gives you your miles, your rates, and adds it all up, and it says I owe New York $124.92. And I could pick any one of those 4 states, and as long as I have miles in that state. So here's the cover sheet. The other one was the worksheet. This is the cover sheet, IO 12492. Print this out, sign my name, include my check, and I'm done filing for the state of New York. Okay. One more final thing is, and I apologize, I keep saying it's the last thing I want to tell you in reports, but I also want to point out that for the people that want to see distance in each state, there is an additional distance in fuel by tractor by state. And this will give me, in addition to it's going to include the mileage breakdowns by state as well. Okay, so here for this tractor, these are the state totals for that unit number. Okay, and it would do that for each unit. So here's unit 1002 in this broken down by state. So this allows you to see your individual state totals if you're interested in analyzing the data that way as well, rather than just a summary of the total miles. All right. So that truly was the last report I wanted to show you. Obviously, you can see there are many, many more. There's a lot to explore in the reports menu. Those are the ones that I think are pretty high up on my priority list that I wanted to make sure you did see. Now, the last thing we're going to come and take a look at is actually downloading the rates. Now, when downloading rates, first thing you want to do, and as I already pointed out, it is in your preferences, you can verify. So what's going to be published is the first quarter rates. We will publish first quarter rates in April, because in April they published the filing rates for the first quarter. All right, so when I go and download these rates, do not expect to see first quarter of 2014, expect to see fourth quarter of 2013, because those were the last filing rates published. Okay, so now to actually retrieve the rates, I go under the utility option and I can choose update tax rates. This brings me to a subscreen where I have a button that allows me to click check now, and this will actually bump you out to our website. Okay, and it basically just gives me instructions on how to download the rates. So it tells me current tax rates are fourth quarter 2013 version 1. That's our version number, nobody else's. So fourth quarter of 2013. So basically, I want to download the update. Before I do that, I will show you that we have a tutorial video. We have a PDF instruction video. Okay? So we have both of those things available to you if you need assistance doing so. Okay? Now I'm going to click download the update. It's going to open up. I'm going to click run. It's going to run a little security scan. It's going to download. It's commonly downloaded and could harm your actions, and I'm going to run anyways. Now I am going to close my TaxTally application before doing this, just so that I don't get any interference. It asks me to pick my filing state. I'm in Connecticut. And then a password. We password protect our rates download. And the reason why we password protect our rates download is because this is a privilege that we offer the people who participate in our support program. If you maintain your enrollment in our support program, then we provide you this service at no additional charge or cost to you. Now, I have 2 passwords written down here. I guessed correctly, so. So my download should be done, I think. The reason why I say I think is because I'm going to go in and I'm going to run TaxTally, and I'll just make sure. If I did it incorrectly, I'll do it again until I get it right. They're still not in yet. My last step is I go back to utility, I go to update tax rates, and I now have to click the button that says install. Okay? It tells me that right here that I'm installing rates version fourth quarter 2013. All you have to do is hit update. And if you looked at the bottom, it scrolled through all of the states and it updated the rates. Now, other than showing you in the preferences that the tax rate is now different, I can't really prove it to you other than, doing that, because, showing you the actual table isn't going to help you or I, because it's not what, maybe that would help you. But anyways, my point is that they updated, and they update in this particular table here. These particular rates were effective as of 10/1/2013. Just because they, a lot of states' rates don't change, but these are the actual rates that it's now using. They have an effective date range, and that's what we would then pick up, and that's what that has done, is it's updated this table. But again, it's all background noise to you as the end user. All you want to make sure is that when you're running in your preferences before you file, that this is giving you the most current rates version. So again, when you go to file in April or maybe early May, this should say 1-2014 because you're using first quarter filing rates. Okay. All right. That concludes the actual live demonstration. So just to summarize, we went over miles and fuel and how it's transferred from dispatch, or we were able to enter it directly into TaxTally. We talked about how to reconcile our miles and adjust them before running our IFTA or submitting our miles and fuel to the IFTA agency for fuel taxes. We talked about how IFTA forms can be sent directly to your state using the forms provided in the software, or transpose data onto your own forms. And we also discussed how to download the updated tax rates that we provide if you subscribe to our Complete Care program. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to open it up. I think Kevin's going to unmute you guys, and we're going to allow you to do some questions. So does anybody have any questions for me? If we could try this, hopefully one at a time. If you guys aren't going to ask questions, if you want to just maybe mute yourself so we don't pick up any background noise, we'll try to do this in an orderly fashion here.
Can you go over getting the fuel charges in there?
All right, could you please identify who that was?
That was Holly Linden.
Holly Linden. When you, what do you mean fuel charges? You mean the fuel purchases when you buy fuel?
Yeah, the fuel expenses. You said they come over, but can you go over how they get in there, whether if you're not using a fuel card?
Absolutely. Now you mean the fuel, now there's two ways to put fuel in manually. One would be to put it directly into TaxTally, but if you're a dispatch user, it's totally different for entering fuel in dispatch. So are you a dispatch user?
Yes.
Holly? Yes.
Yes.
So if you're a dispatch user, you want to enter it in under the advance option. So under advances, you would click the money bag here. You would then choose the driver that you want to put the fuel purchase in for. You have the option of making it trip related or non-trip related. Trip related would mean you would double click on the actual load number. Non-trip related fuel purchase means you would add edit NTA. You would then click the add button, and under advanced type, you would choose fuel. Then you would use the fuel data section to pick what tractor number, the city and state that you're buying fuel, the number of gallons that you purchased, and the amount that you paid. This entry, now that is how I would record that in dispatch, and then once recorded, would then be available under accounting, under post. Here it is right here, and it's waiting for me to now select it and send it over to TaxTally. Again, you typically delay the transfer. You don't, probably until payroll has cleared. So you usually are waiting a minimum of 3 weeks before posting to TaxTally, because if I post this, it then gets locked and I can't make edits to it. So enter it in dispatch, finish all of your billing and payroll for that pay period, and then on a 2-week behind schedule, I would then come back and post these transactions into TaxTally.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Diane McCloskey. On the TaxTally standalone, is it networkable? In other words, could various people get into the application at different points in time and make entry?
The answer to that is yes.
Because it's this is a web-based program, correct?
It is not.
Or does it sit on our network?
It would sit on your network.
Okay.
So you would have to, you would take and you would have to have a share set up on your server. You would have to map your workstations to that share on the server. You would install the software over the share, so from a workstation to the server, and then you would run workstation setups on the remaining computers that you would like to also log in.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
This is Holly Linden again. In the beginning, you added miles by state. Is there a way to know that? What miles go in what state? Or is it normally just, you need some miles in this state?
Well, with dispatch and the link to dispatch, we base it off of the dispatch trip, so the origin to destination, and we gauge it using our mileage program. So our mileage program assumes a route. So what I think where you're driving is saying, well, you could possibly drive a different route than our mileage program and end up with a separate set of states and miles. And the answer to that is absolutely yes, that could potentially happen. The idea, though, is that we want to report an accurate amount of miles. There is a threshold, that of discrepancy that is a tolerance level, I would say, that's allowable when doing your fuel tax reporting. So I'm sure that most users have a general idea of the states and approximately how many miles, and the idea is to make sure that your totals come out and that you try to make up miles in the states that you think that you're low on miles. Sometimes it means subtracting them from another state and putting them to a different state. Sometimes it means adding miles to your home state just to make up the difference. But it is kind of, the only way to be absolutely sure is if you were going to take and reconcile each trip against your driver's, trip sheet or log sheet, wherever they record this information for you. That is the only 100% most accurate method for doing so. But like I said, a lot of times there's a threshold or tolerance level for accuracy. I would say that as long as the exact miles match that you report, again, most of the times they're looking for missing miles, people not reporting miles, avoiding paying taxes. And as long as you're paying taxes to someone on those miles, as long as your home state is getting what they're supposed to, it's typically what they care about.
Okay, thank you.
As my personal opinion. Any other questions?
Steve, this is Kathryn Edgerton.
Hi, Kathryn.
Hello. Where was the lookup? Did you show a lookup?
I did. So I clicked on the IFTA money bag, and when I clicked add to enter a new transaction, I'm going to switch to unit number 1. There's an option for tax link. And when I click on tax link, it gives me this routing point option. So then that's where I can put in I'm just doing zip codes because I know a couple. Then I click lookup, and it gives me, and it looks up using those points. So obviously the more points I provide, the better a route it can give me. And then I get my mileage totals, and then I click OK, and then it takes those mileage totals and it puts them into the transaction sheet. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, because I was looking for a way to enter those alternative routes that the driver takes. And if you could put in zip codes along their alternative routes, then you could get the state miles. You wouldn't have to go toggle between programs trying to figure out how many states in each mile.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
So I hope that's helpful for you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Hello, Steve?
Yes.
Steve. Yes. Good afternoon. This is Josh from Mustang Express. Hey,
Hi, Josh.
quick question for you. Hey,
Yes,
quick question for you. With TaxTally, we use a GPS unit that gives us the actual miles from the actual truck itself, and we can just run a report quickly. But with Prophecy, since we run the dispatch as well, it inputs the miles from the trip pack, or the miles from the dispatch into TaxTally. Is there a way for us to just zero out those and then do like the standalone, where you can just do add the trip? What was it? The step that you showed halfway through, where you can just add all the miles together for the quarter?
Right. Yeah, that's what I would do if I were you. I wouldn't bother transferring the trip miles between the interface, because even if you do that, you still got to reconcile, but you can already pull, because you have GPS units, you can already pull mileage totals with state breakdowns. So that's right. All you would have to do is just come on, add it, click on your, click on your money bag, add a transaction, pick any date in the month that you're reporting, and then call it what it is. If you don't even have to put reconcile. You can just put 03/2014 for 001, and then just take all the states and the mileage totals and plug them in one big entry, and that gives you your entire month. I would do it by month so that you can analyze by month. So you'd make 3 entries per truck, 1 for each month of the quarter, and that'll give you your miles, and they'd be dead on to your GPS units.
Okay. And so what you're saying is in Prophecy Dispatch not to do the post-fuel taxes in. Is that correct? That's
correct. So under the accounting menu, you can skip the step of posting the fuel tax. Basically, you're just not... They don't go anywhere. They'll just stay in dispatch and not do anything. You're just preventing them from sending to TaxTally, which there's nothing wrong with doing that. Just don't send them, and it's not hurting anything staying in dispatch, and then just manually enter in your monthly totals for each unit off of your GPS reports.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
No problem. My pleasure. Okay. Any other last questions?
Steve?
Yes?
Well, I had a kind of a secondary question to the one that you just answered.
Yes, sir.
You would have to do, if you're using the GPS miles, and you'd have to do it for every state and for every unit. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct. You have to obviously break the miles down per state for each unit. Now, I suppose if you didn't want to break them down by unit, you don't have to, because the IFTA report isn't a report on unit, it's a fleet report. So you could make one entry just for the states and just default them all to one unit. But that you're cheating yourself detail by doing that would be my answer. So if you wanted to, a very simple way, you could report all the miles under one unit ID. Because once again, IFTA doesn't care which unit is driving those miles, because when you get an audit, they're not auditing my program, they're auditing your logs and your trip sheets and your fuel transactions. This is just a means to an end. So in other words, if I just used one truck number and put all my miles for my entire fleet under that one truck number, it's going to give me the same answer as if I entered them in unit by unit. But what I'm doing is I'm cheating myself the detail. If I want to extract reports out of this program, it is to my benefit to report by unit. Obviously, I have to report miles by each state. That's how the IFTA report works. And by unit, and at a minimum, in my opinion, of monthly for any good side reporting that you might look for out of the application.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, then I'm just going to turn it over to Kevin, and he's got just a closing statement. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me today. I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the Visions 2014 User Conference. That's going to be in Denver, Colorado, or maybe again in a future webinar Wednesday. Thank you all very much. Kevin?
Once again, we'd just like to thank you for attending today. And if you do have ideas for future topics that you'd like to see in our monthly webinar series, please send that information over to us at info@mile.com. Thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.